It's a good morning. Welcome to Sake Online. My name is Zenzele Ndebele, and this is the Breakfast Club. Today, we are bringing you a program in partnership with Transparency International Zimbabwe, and we are talking about monitoring COVID funds. We know there are a lot of donations that are being passed around. People are receiving monies from all over the world, and also from the community, and we want to find out exactly how are we going to account for this money. So to talk to us or help us break down this very important topic, we are going to be talking to the MP from Kulumane, Pulu. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Zenzele.
Yes, this is day 19 of the lockdown. What has been your experience?
My experience is that it has been quite a difficult period, particularly as people attempted to comply with the lockdown and basically stay at home. And one of the major challenges has been the question of how do you stay at home when you have no food, you have no water, you have no access to health, and so forth. You have no money. You are unable to pay rent. So we find strenuous relationships within households. We find strenuous relationships between landlords and tenants. We find people unable to eat, basically. And so you will see people moving around trying to eke out a living.
Yeah, you're raising very important issues of social welfare, which are some of the issues that we're going to talk to in this program. But to start with, in this time where we have a pandemic, we have a lockdown, we have a lot of things that are going on, what is the role of a member of parliament or a legislator?
I think the role of a legislator, you know that we have a legislative role. We have an oversight role, so we must oversee the process. And obviously, I always say the third role is the leadership role. We must exercise and show leadership to our people and our constituents during this time, and basically represent them. And the starting point should be, as we came into this COVID-19 crisis, did we have adequate legislative provisions to enable the government to deal with to initiate their responses? And my comment would be to say that I think that the Public Health Act, which is a post-2013 act, so it's part of the alignment, what people call alignment, laws. It actually recognizes the rights in the Constitution in its preamble, has adequate provisions which the Minister of Health has invoked to pass two regulations and an order, which is part of the legislative framework that they've used. We also have the legislation to deal on how to deal with disasters. That one has not been invoked, except that, of course, the state of public disaster has been used. But mainly we have seen the Public Health Act being used. We've also seen the Minister of Labour also passing a regulation relating to minimum salaries or minimum income, minimum wages for everybody except those in the agricultural sector and domestic workers. We've also seen the Minister of Finance passing regulations dealing with issues to do with money. And so I can say that the legislative framework has been there. And I think it has been used reasonably, but obviously without the oversight, because Parliament is currently closed. And so, when you have an SI, it must go to Parliament by a certain time. And also when you have money, you talked about money, you have a general situation. It would have been good if Parliament was open, if that was possible, because you have different committees which can then provide oversight. And that's not happening, so that's a disadvantage. So I've already talked about oversight. Then there's leadership, in the sense that once government has said we are going on a 21 days lockdown, as an MP, you must then follow up by trying to communicate with your constituents. In this case, it's quite difficult because people are on general lockdown. But you must find means to reach out and communicate to say, comply with the regulations that government is saying, and give them a little bit of information. Then you must be able to say, these are some of the issues that you have raised. So it means you must have a mechanism of getting feedback. And this is how we are going to deal with them. In my case, I had to go to the police to say, people are complaining that, as we sell meal, we see people who are coming in to buy, the same people buying all the time. How are we going to deal with it? You have to liaise with those who are the grain millers, find out when meal is going to be delivered. And I'm happy that they have set out a timetable. They haven't complied with it because they're facing some challenges. I know in my constituency, meal was supposed to come on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Up to today, we haven't had adequate deliveries of meal. So these are some of the little things that you have. But most importantly, if you go to the Public Health Act, Section 32, there's a principle, it's the do no harm principle. So it imposes a duty on everyone. Everyone in the country is given a duty to act in accordance, to behave in a manner which won't jeopardize the public health. So we must comply with the regulations. We must cooperate with the authorities, and our own personal conduct must not contribute to this. So if, as an MP, while I move around, and I tell you I've been moving around this period, I've always had something to do every day. But in as much as I go around, I must do it with restraint and responsibly, because in the end, as a public official, I'm the one who has access to move around. And I'm mobile. And in an epidemic such as this one, when I'm mobile, I can end up being the person who infects the most people. If I start doing things, if I pick up a tin here and say I'm going to deliver a sanitizer there, it's good. But if I don't do it through the appropriate authorities, I'm not a health person, I may end up infecting people whilst trying to do good. These are some of the challenges that I've seen.
Yes, you have also highlighted a lot in terms of the social welfare side, where we are seeing meal shortages, we are seeing people spending most of their time in the queues. But also at the same time, we've seen that in the last month or so, there's been a lot of donations coming. At government level, has been receiving a lot of money from different organizations. Initiatives in the communities, people have been fundraising on GoFundMe, on Facebook, on WhatsApp. All these monies are monies that are somewhere. What do you think should be done to make sure that these monies will, at the end of the day, benefit the right people?
I will divide your question into two. I'll first deal with the issue of social welfare and why we are having challenges. Experts have been saying that, epidemics such as these ones tend to do one thing. They tend to expose your already existing inadequacies. So, for example, if you had not set aside enough money for social welfare, it's going to come back to bite you when there's a crisis like this one. If your delivery system in terms of making sure that how you identify social welfare cases, and then how how that money that you want to distribute gets to them, or how that maize meal that you want to distribute gets to them. And you remember we already had a meal shortage. Those things have been multiplied, they've been emphasized by this crisis. And I think that going forward, we must, even after we defeat this COVID-19, we must continue to make sure that we've got proper systems of dealing with social welfare, dealing with social safety nets that are not biased, that are not politicized, and that are efficient. And I would encourage the central government working with local government. Because remember, if you go to the Civil Protection Act, it already requires, the government already requires, it says the minister can require local authorities to have isolation centers. This is one thing that people didn't know. If you look at that, it will say, you are required. This is why we have Thorn Group, it's a statutory requirement. This is why we have Wilkins, it's a statutory requirement. Then it also speaks to the government, how the government will fund the local authorities to ensure that they run those things effectively. So I think local government, central government coordination needs to improve. And this is a major weakness that has been exposed in that regard. And we hope that the situation will improve. Meanwhile, I think we have been talking to authorities, the police and so forth, and they've promised to make sure that there's efficiency in that regard. Let me move on to the key question that you asked. I have attended one occasion where I am for Bulawayo, as an example. I went and I supported them and I spoke there. They're doing a good job. But how they've done it is they've opened a properly registered trust, and they made this public, so I can say it. They registered a trust, they appointed accountants, and they told everybody these are the accountants. They appointed auditors and said these are the auditors. They appointed lawyers and said these are the lawyers advising us. And so it's an initiative. The framework that they have is such that you can trust them. And I'm sure because they are registered, they are doing it lawfully. In terms of the PVO Act, it's actually an offense to start collecting money for charitable causes when you are not registered, either in terms of the PVO Act or as a trust. It actually makes it an offense. And whilst it's important for people to mobilize money, because we're in an emergency, I can't wait for registration in order to help my neighbor. But it's important to then do it in liaison with the authorities, either the city council or the ministry or central government, some framework where you can hand over money and account for it. Otherwise, you can get a lot of instances where you have money and it remains unaccounted for. As far as government is concerned, because they've also been receiving massive amounts of money to assist, both in cash and in kind as well. We know we got the masks. We got masks from Jack Ma. We got all sorts of donations. We saw responsible citizens like Econet. It's all sorts of donations. And at the end of the day, we hope that they are being deployed efficiently and effectively. In terms of how this is accounted for, the Minister of Finance actually sent out a statement which I saw, where he says, look, all this will be accounted for by the Minister of Health, working with the Minister of Finance, and obviously the Auditor General. So this is the framework that they're going to be using. An additional oversight mechanism is obviously that at the end of this whole crisis, there must be a report which is taken to Parliament for Parliament to see. But this is afterwards. In the meantime, Parliament is not sitting. And ordinarily you would have committees. You would have a committee on finance which would look into this, call relevant office bearers and ask them to update and try and understand what's being done. You would have the Committee on Health also being active. You would have different committees doing their work. The Committee on Justice, on which I sit, looking into the legalities and how the laws are being enforced. When Parliament is sitting, there's effective mechanism. Now, as a member of Parliament, because obviously there's a lockdown, we have to understand the exigencies of the situation. We can't convene 200-something members of Parliament. It would exacerbate the situation. But I think that oversight, we need to start thinking about innovative ways in which we could do oversight during this period. On an individual level, for example, I've analyzed the laws, the framework, and tried to talk about it, tweet about it, and so forth. I've seen MPs approaching government ministers, trying to be part of what is happening so that they can understand. And unfortunately, the government has tended to be aloof, and there's no formal framework, or even an informal one which has been agreed, where we can interface and assist each other. This is the time for cooperating. And unfortunately, the cooperation has not been enhanced, and I hope that it is going to happen very soon.
Yes, this is the program, The Breakfast Club, brought to you by SITE and Transparency International Zimbabwe. This is a live program. If you are watching and you have questions that you want to ask the MP, you can post the questions and we'll pose the questions to him. So you are not in session right now, and a lot of monies are flying around, donations and everywhere. When Parliament resumes, are these things going to be taken to Parliament and be discussed and be approved of the actions that were taken during the lockdown period?
I'm sure that's going to be the first order of business. And I am sure that Parliament is going to, or the necessary bodies will have to sit down to ensure that the timelines, for example, for the statutory instruments are met. But I think there's still some time. And I'm sure it will be a post-lockdown. I'm assuming that the lockdown is ending, this week, because I haven't heard anything to the contrary. so far. So that's going to be a postcode, and we're still going to be within the timelines. But I'm sure that the issue of oversight is going to be the first order of business. For example, you know, we have Wednesdays where questions can be asked. That's another important oversight tool. And certainly, I think you will see that when Parliament resumes, it's all going to be about COVID. Because there won't be time for anything else. Remember that the COVID challenge won't be over simply because the lockdown is over. I think we're in this for the medium to long term. You know, we're in it for the long haul. And we must continue to ensure that we have responses on an ongoing basis for us to succeed at the end of the day, and to give our people hope as well.
We have talked, I mean, there is clearly a way where we can hold government accountable. The other day I went to GoFundMe and I just searched COVID Zimbabwe, and 56 initiatives came up. These are 56 different initiatives of people fundraising on different things about COVID Zimbabwe. There are also a number of Facebook pages where people are fundraising monies. How best can citizens make sure that the monies that were collected for COVID get to the right beneficiaries?
The first thing that I will say is that it would surprise me quite greatly, and it would really disappoint me in terms of my faith in humanity and human beings. If there's a crisis like this and somebody were to raise money under the name of COVID and then find a way of cashing in on that, it would be really sad. But I think a lot of the people who will raise money are doing it from a good place. So I would recommend that when they raise the money, they can give the money not directly to the intended targets, but you know, you have the city council, for example, which is able to receive donations. If you are saying, look, I want to do something for Bulawayo, that's a starting point. And remember, the city council is also working with there's a nexus between them and central government right now. I just saw a report they published on the Bulawayo City Council, for instance. They published a report on the 15th, and it shows you clearly that they are working with central government. And in that report, they have a list of some of the donations which have been made by different people. You could contact the Ministry of Health as well, you know, to say, I have this donation, and they could guide you and direct you on how to do it. I saw today, for example, you know, one of the discussions that has been happening is that members of parliament themselves want to make donations variously and in different ways. And the question will arise, how are they going to do it? And obviously those donations should either be targeted at the Ministry of Health, or those who want to do it at a local level, you have your local authority, and then they will take it to the beneficiaries and account. There's an emphasis, if you look at you know, Section 31 of the Public Health Act, it's got principles that should be followed as we do these things. It promotes public-private cooperation. So basically what we're talking about is public-private cooperation, which is in Section 31. It promotes also the involvement of local communities and local people in decisions relating to, you know, the pandemic and other good practices that you will find listed there. And so there is a legal framework to deal with that.
Then from a legal point of view, we have seen the way we're starting to see stigmatization of people who are tested positive and being called all sorts of names. Is it advisable for government or health institutions to name the people who have tested positive? How can we navigate this area?
Again, I take you back to Section 31 of the Public Health Act. It says that one of the things you should take into account, of course, there's transparency, accountability, and so forth, but it also says you have to respect human rights, you have to respect your international obligations. And you know that in Zimbabwe, in as far as our government policy towards, and even our laws, towards disclosing doctor-patient confidentiality is that you cannot do that. But also the whole question of stigmatization and so forth. I mean, we've had court cases in South Africa with the Grootboom case, which says you can't do that. Unfortunately, I haven't seen an instance of the government doing so. You can correct me, but I have not seen an instance where the government has named someone. I think the transgression, I've seen it coming from the media, from you guys. As you write your reports, you name that, patient number so and so. And then you give the context where any person who is around that area can know that you're talking about so and so. You have an instance where, somebody says, there's a woman who has been named. This came up, I think it was via WhatsApp, not through, I don't think it was a journalist, but someone circulated a police document which had the name of somebody. And then the press went on to say, oh, she has a daughter who goes to such and such a college, who would like to discourage. I mean, the leadership part is that we would like to, let's not blame. Let me say as an MP, we would like to discourage naming minors and naming people by name when it's unnecessary, especially those who are ill or are infected.
There's a question here from Innocent Ndebele, and he's saying, my question to the MP is it true that government has availed $590 million to fight COVID-19? If so, why is Ekusile and Thorngrove not funded from the budget, considering how urgent the situation is? Are we being marginalized again as a province?
One of the principles that you'll find in Section 31 is that they must take into account, minors and other minority issues. They must ensure that there is balance. And I think that the government ought to give us a report. We haven't had a formal report from the government at this stage. They should give us an interim report. I've seen the Bulawayo City Council has been able to do it, summarizing what the issues are and what has been done. They've told us that is it Thorngrove, which has about 40 beds. If you read that report, it tells you what has happened. But the problem is that we don't know what has happened to those donations. There's been a summary to say some of the masks that were donated by a certain individual were not working, they are still buying this. But let them give us a formal report so that we can be able to answer that question. But certainly we must have had money, to deal with these kind of things. We had a budget. There has been no emphasis by the government in their reports on how we have used our own Zimbabwean money. Never mind that it's a small amount. How have we been able to contribute as a nation, as a government, from our own coffers towards this, and how has that been distributed? But certainly, I think it's urgent for us to see a distribution metrics of all the donations that have been made.
Then there is Advocate Fafa here. He says, waiting for lockdown to end might be too late. Please organize a rapid response task force from Parliament to monitor the funding process. So
I think he makes a valid point. To say, because ordinarily, if Parliament was in session, you would be having committees, and committees would be dealing with this, on an almost immediate basis. And right now, you don't have that. And I think that Parliament should actually act swiftly to ensure that there is a certain loose number of people who are authorized to summon relevant officers to come and explain these things so that we can explain to the nation. So I agree with the comment.
Yeah, I think as we bring the program to the close, my question to you is, for those who are watching, they can continue to ask and we'll field these questions to you on Facebook, or even on Twitter. You are twittering, yes. So we can always answer even after the program. But going forward, let's say, cases have risen to 10 now in Bulawayo and 23 nationwide. Chances are the lockdown might be increased. Social welfare, what do you think needs to be happening?
I think the first thing is that they need to tell us how much they have. And then they need to tell us how they're going to distribute it. And they need to tell us the criteria upon which they are picking people. But they also need to give enough leeway for the community to be involved in line with that principle I talked about in Section 31. As you identify these beneficiaries, involve the community, involve councillors especially, because the Constitution says the councillors are the representatives of the people. That's what it says, and certainly they have to be involved in identifying these cases. I also suggested that they should work very well with the local government. I'll give you an example. Bulawayo City Council, I'm from Bulawayo, so I always use Bulawayo City Council as an example, has the capacity to do certain things effectively and efficiently, because they're into service delivery. And if you want to deliver certain things quickly, if central government were to work with them on a method of doing so, I think they would be able to achieve it. The eco-cash method, people have been complaining. Many people have been coming to me to say, who are these people who have been receiving this money? We have not been receiving it. Everywhere I go. And I'm sure there are some who are receiving it. I'm not saying they are not. But people are not seeing it being done. Because sometimes things should not only be done, but must be seen to be done. So we must have respect, we must have transparency. And I think the transparency has been lacking. And one of the things is that, I am an MP. And I haven't sat in a meeting with the Minister of State for Bulawayo. I haven't sat in a meeting with any government official to discuss logistics, to discuss challenges, and to discuss, what solutions we have. And I think this is a major weakness. And I would urge the Minister of Health and the Minister of Local Government to ensure that this happens urgently. I know that in Mutare there was a meeting and in other different places, but in Bulawayo we haven't had one. In fact, MPs have been rebuffed as they try to say, let's sit and, put our heads together. I had to go to the police to find out how they are going to be monitoring the queues for millimil. But ordinarily, I should have had it at a planning meeting. Or I should have been briefed after a planning meeting. Remember, Zenzele, we are not implementers as MPs. So I can understand that at the same time, we mustn't be meddling with the executive as they try to implement. They have a discretion which we must allow them to implement. So that when we now do our oversight, they won't say, we failed because you meddled. But at the same time, they must keep us well briefed and they must hear our ideas. Because remember, we have a representative role, we represent the people. They tell us things, they tell us complaints, and I'm sure that if this is a crisis, there's no time for politicking and saying this is mine, this is mine. It's a fight for our survivor. It's a fight for your life. It's a fight for my life. It's a fight for everyone's life. And one of the things we mustn't do as leaders is politic. One of the things we mustn't do is to spread a message of fear and despondency. What we need to be telling our people is that we will beat this, and I think we will beat it, and we will come out better on the other side. But we must ensure that we suffer as a minimum level of casualty as possible. This is the message we should be telling our people. Let us comply. The government should give us the food, give us the security, but nonetheless we'll jump the bridge and we'll be alive on the other side. You know what, Zenzele? There is no 2023 if I don't survive this. There is no 2023 if people in my constituency, are all dead. So I shouldn't be worrying about the re-election. The problem with many of us politicians now, we are worrying about re-election, we are worrying about so many things. But this is the time to forget about that. You can sort that out after the COVID issue is done and all your neighbors are alive.
On that strong message to say let's all come out alive, I would like to thank you for coming to this program and sharing with us what needs to be done in trying to monitor funds that are donated or channeled towards COVID. To those who are watching online, I would like to thank you very much. This is Zenzele Ndebele, and the program was The Breakfast Club in partnership with Transparency International Zimbabwe, where we were talking about how we can monitor COVID funds or donations, because we know a lot of money has been passed around, has been donated, and there is always an issue of accountability to say, where what happens to the money that the government is receiving from different individuals, companies, international organizations. But this time around is also about many community initiatives that are collecting money on behalf of the communities, saying that this money is going to be helping a COVID program. So we are urging people to be accountable, to make sure that if you are receiving donations on behalf of the communities, they should get that money, or the beneficiaries should benefit. And we're hoping that at the end of the COVID pandemic, we are not going to have cases of people being accused of fraud and all those kind of things. Above all, we want our government to be transparent, open, and accountable. My name is Zenzele Ndebele. Till we meet again tomorrow, have a good day.